Far away from Earth, in a part of space known as Sector Z91, fear ruled the stars. The Creel Empire was the reason. They were powerful, cruel, and unstoppable. Their ships were huge and sharp like metal monsters. Their weapons could burn cities in seconds. They controlled over 27 star systems and no one could stop them. Planets bowed to them without a fight. Anyone who dared to resist was destroyed. The Creel leaders believed they were the kings of the galaxy. Then one day, they heard something strange. Humans were coming. The Creel had heard of humans before, from a quiet planet called Earth, far away from the center of the galaxy. Humans had never joined any big wars. They stayed silent while others fought. But now, something had changed. Whispers spread across the stars. Earth was sending a ship. The Creel laughed when they heard it. "Let them come," shouted Supreme Warlord Varkon. "We'll burn their whole fleet." They believed the humans would bring thousands of warships, big and strong. They were ready to crush them. But something no one expected happened. A single ship appeared. Just one. It came out of hyperspace quietly, without warning, without sound. The ship had no name, no flag, no bright lights. It looked like a shadow, smooth and silent. It didn't raise its shields or charge any weapons. It simply floated in front of the massive Creel fleet like it didn't care. On the bridge of the Creel's biggest ship, Vengeance, Captain Drex stared at the screen. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Is that a scout ship?" His officers checked their systems and looked confused. "We don't know," one of them replied. "It doesn't match any known ship designs. It's not in our database, and it's not doing anything." Captain Drex growled, "That's not possible. Everything can be identified." They watched closely. The unknown ship just sat there. Then suddenly, it sent a message. No greetings, no warnings, just 5 cold words. "This is enough. Stand down." No one spoke. The bridge went silent. Even the low hum of the engines felt louder. Captain Drex raised an eyebrow and burst out laughing. "One ship dares threaten the Creel Empire? This is a joke. Fire everything," he shouted. In seconds, the Creel fleet launched their attack. Dozens of plasma beams, missiles, and disruptors shot out through space toward the human ship. The stars lit up like a storm of fire and thunder. All eyes were on the screen. Smoke and flames filled the space around the unknown ship. Creel officers smiled. They thought it was over. But when the light and smoke cleared, the ship was still. There, floating, untouched. Not a single scratch, no damage, no reaction. It was as if the attack had never happened. Captain Drex's smile faded. His fingers tightened around the edge of his seat. Something wasn't right. This wasn't a scout ship. This wasn't anything they had ever seen before. And suddenly, a feeling grew deep inside the Creel soldiers. Something they hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. The Creel fleet had never missed a target before. Their weapons were fast, brutal, and unforgiving. When they fired, planets trembled and enemies turned to dust. So when the entire fleet launched a full attack on the lone human ship, they expected it to disappear in flames. But what they saw next made their hearts freeze. The smoke cleared, and the mysterious ship still floated calmly in space, untouched and silent. It hadn't even moved. No shield had flared. No weapon had answered. It was as if their strongest attack had passed through air. Captain Drex sat stiff in his chair, eyes wide, unsure whether his screens were broken. Around him, his officers stared in disbelief. No damage, no explosion, no response. It was like the ship was made of something unreal. Then, without warning, the ship gave off a strange pulse. It was quiet. No flash, no sound. Just a ripple of energy, soft and smooth, like a breath of air in the void. At first, no one understood what it meant, but within seconds, things started to go wrong. The Vengeance's targeting systems blinked out. Their shields dropped to 0. Plasma cannons went quiet. Across the fleet, chaos spread. Engines sputtered, lights flickered, and communication systems stopped working. Panic swept through the ships. Crew members shouted over failing controls. One officer screamed, "Sir! Systems are shutting down! I can't fix it!" Another yelled, "The weapons won't respond! They're dead!" Drex slammed his fists on the control panel, his voice rising in fear. Is this a virus? How are they doing this? But no answers came. They couldn't even send a message to the other ships. The entire fleet was silent. It was like someone had reached inside their ships and flipped off every switch. Still, the human ship didn't fire. It didn't even glow. It simply moved forward, slowly and peacefully, like it was taking a walk through the graveyard it had just made. As it glided past the Creel warships, each one lost more power. Lights dimmed, shields faded. Some ships started spinning, their engines failing completely. The ship wasn't attacking. It was observing, watching, like a teacher walking through a room of noisy children who had just been told to sit down. Captain Drex felt sweat on his forehead. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a warning. The more he looked at the ship, the less it seemed like a machine. It felt more like a force of nature, cold, quiet, and unstoppable. He turned to his officers. "Is it even using weapons?" he asked, voice low. The answer came back with a whisper. "No, sir. There are no energy spikes, no projectiles. It's doing this without firing anything." Drex sat back slowly. The Creel Empire had crushed hundreds of fleets before, and not once had they met something like this. One ship, no name, no heat, no fear, was shutting down their entire army. The strangest part was that the human ship hadn't tried to kill them. It could have, but it didn't. It had simply told them to stop. Now they were powerless, floating in space, while the ship continued its slow, steady path through the fleet. Silence filled the bridge of the Vengeance, broken only by flickering screens and frightened breathing. The Creel were no longer in control. They had always thought of humans as weak, soft, and slow. But now they were learning something terrifying. Humans don't have to scream to be dangerous. Sometimes they only need to whisper. Far across the galaxy, the message spread faster than light. The mighty Creel Empire had been silenced by a single human ship. No one could believe it at first. Many thought it was a lie, a trick, some kind of clever story made to scare the smaller star systems. But then came the footage. Raw, unedited clips showing the Creel warships frozen in space, engines dark, weapons dead, and the one strange human ship drifting calmly among them. People watched it again and again, eyes wide, mouths open. They didn't see any explosions, no big battles, no fire. Just one silent ship that had turned the galaxy's most feared fleet into floating statues. The smaller planets who had once feared the Creel now dared to breathe again. Some even cheered in the streets. But leaders, generals, and warlords of other empires weren't cheering. They were watching carefully, with nervous eyes. If humans could do this to the Creel with one ship, what could they do with 10? With 100? Back at the Creel homeworld, fear turned to confusion. The High Council met in secret, whispering like frightened children. Supreme Warlord Varkon slammed his hand on the long black table and growled, "How can they possess this power? What kind of ship was that? What kind of humans are we facing?" No one had answers. Scientists ran tests, searched for hidden tech, even guessed it might be a ghost ship from a forgotten war. But there was no sign of advanced weapons, no shields, no attacks. The ship had simply moved in, shut everything down, and left. A soft invasion. No destruction, just complete control. And then it disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next, it was gone. No hyperspace jump, no light trail, just vanished. Some said it folded into a space humans understood, but others didn't. Some said it was a warning, not a war. Meanwhile, across human space, Earth remained quiet. No loud broadcasts, no threats, no claims of victory. When asked about the ship, Earth simply said, "We sent what was necessary." They gave no details. They made no demands. That silence was scarier than war. Other empires sent spies to Earth, hoping to learn more. But what they found was strange. Earth didn't look like a planet building war machines. There were no massive fleets, no grand space docks, just calm cities, busy people, and a government that seemed more focused on peace than power. But those who looked deeper saw something odd. Humans were not building armies. They were building minds. AI research had reached levels far beyond what other species could imagine. Some whispered that the ship wasn't a ship at all. It was something else. Something alive. Something thinking. Not human, not machine, but a mix of both. A creation of Earth's darkest science, born not to destroy, but to end wars before they could begin. In hidden corners of the galaxy, the smart ones began to understand. Humans hadn't come late to the war because they were weak. They had waited because they were preparing. They had watched, learned, and built something that no one could match. Not bigger guns, not stronger shields, but something different. Something that could make weapons useless. The message was now clear to every ruler, every empire, every rebel leader. If humans send one ship, that's not mercy, that's a warning. And if they ever send two, it might already be too late. Across the galaxy, fear began to turn into something more dangerous. Curiosity. The Creel Empire, once so sure of its power, found itself surrounded by uncertainty. The human ship that had shut down their entire fleet still haunted their thoughts. It was like a shadow in their minds, a silent reminder of their vulnerability. They had believed that no one could stand against them. Not the star systems they ruled, not the empires that had cowered before them. But humans had done the impossible. One ship, without firing a single shot, had exposed the Creel's weakness, and now they were determined to understand it. The Creel scientists worked day and night, desperate to uncover the truth. They combed through their star systems for clues, looking for any hint of what had happened. But the more they searched, the more they realized that the humans hadn't used technology they couldn't understand. They had used something far simpler, far more terrifying. They had used strategy. They had studied the Creel for centuries. Humans had learned how to think beyond the weapons, beyond the typical ways of war. The Creel had relied on brute force, on overwhelming power. But the humans didn't need force. They needed only a moment. A single second to stop everything. And that's what terrified the Creel most. What if this was just the beginning? What if the humans had more? What if there were more ships waiting? More tricks up their sleeves? While the Creel scrambled to make sense of the humans' power, other empires began to take notice. The Terrans, a race known for their deep space exploration, sent quiet messages to Earth. The Zerothians, a species of traders with ships that could travel faster than light, offered their alliances. Even the Valtarians, a fierce species who had once fought the Creel, sent a fleet to Earth's borders, seeking knowledge. They wanted to know how the humans had done it. The silence from Earth was as cold as ever. They refused to reveal any secrets, and that only made everyone more curious. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the humans had captured a Creel ship and reverse-engineered their technology. Others believed the humans had made a deal with a race older than the Creel, one that didn't care about the galaxy's rulers, but no one knew for sure. Earth refused to speak. In the depths of their darkened cities, Earth's leaders quietly made plans. They had anticipated that this would happen. They had known that their quiet victory would raise questions, and that it would make them a target. But they were ready. Humans had long known that war wasn't about weapons. It was about understanding. They had watched the Creel for decades, learning their strategies, understanding their weaknesses. The human ship that had done the impossible wasn't just a piece of technology. It was the result of years of careful thought and research. It wasn't about building the biggest warship. It was about knowing how to fight without fighting. The other empires knew that their position was weak. They were afraid that, like the Creel, they would be next. Many of them began to rethink their relationships with Earth. They couldn't afford to make enemies of a species that had shown such power. They needed to know how to survive, how to adapt. But the humans didn't want to rule the galaxy. They didn't want to conquer. They had already won the most important war, the war for peace. And if they needed to send one ship to remind the galaxy of that, they would. The quiet ship that had once drifted through the Creel fleet was just the beginning. There were more ships, more strategies, more plans, each one a quiet statement. The galaxy would never look the same again, and the humans had already shown that they didn't need to fight to win. They only needed to make sure no one ever forgot who they were. The galaxy had become a place of whispers and uncertainty. The Creel Empire, once a symbol of unstoppable power, now stood on shaky ground. Their defeat by a single human ship had left them broken, their once great reputation shattered. No one knew the full extent of what had happened, or how one ship had shut down their entire fleet without firing a single shot. But what everyone did know was that the humans were not a species to be underestimated. They had proven themselves to be not only resilient, but cunning in ways no one had anticipated. The great warlords, the rulers of vast empires, were no longer certain of their place in the galaxy. They had always assumed they were untouchable, but the humans had shown them that power wasn't always about strength. It was about intelligence, strategy, and control. Meanwhile, Earth continued to hold its silence. Leaders on the home planet knew that their victory had changed the course of history, but they had no interest in flaunting it. There was no grand declaration, no demand for recognition. The human ship that had faced down the Creel fleet wasn't a symbol of conquest. It was a symbol of restraint. Earth had chosen to show the galaxy that it didn't need to destroy to win. It didn't need to conquer. It needed only to remind others that there was another way, a better way. And in that silence, the galaxy began to change. Empires that had once seen Earth as weak or insignificant began to reconsider their positions. They started to understand that a species that could take down the Creel with a single ship could easily alter the balance of power. Some empires, who had once thought of humans as just another race to ignore, now saw them as equals, or even more. The humans hadn't just shown the galaxy that they were powerful. They had shown them that their power was not meant to be feared but respected, that they didn't need to be the strongest to win. They had proven that there was more to victory than might. There was wisdom, control, and the ability to understand when to act and when to wait. The Creel, for all their power, had relied on brute force. The humans had relied on something far more dangerous: the ability to think ahead, to plan, to strike when the time was right. Other empires began sending ambassadors to Earth, seeking alliances, offering trade deals, and even seeking knowledge. They knew that they could no longer afford to ignore this quiet power. But Earth remained calm, its leaders focused on maintaining balance. They knew the galaxy was changing, and they were ready to adapt. But they would do it on their terms. No one could push them into war. No one could make them act out of fear. The humans had learned long ago that the greatest power was often the ability to remain calm in the face of chaos. The ship that had defeated the Creel had not fired a single shot. It had simply shown the galaxy that power wasn't something to be flaunted. It was something to be controlled. The galaxy had learned its lesson. The great powers were no longer so sure of themselves. The Creel had been humbled, and others were beginning to realize that it wasn't enough to be the biggest or the strongest. The future belonged to those who could think, who could outwit and outmaneuver their enemies. The quiet, calm human ship had done more than defeat the Creel. It had changed the very nature of war. And the galaxy, unsure and unsteady, had no choice but to acknowledge the new order. Earth, the species once considered weak, had shown that sometimes silence was the deadliest weapon of all. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The humans had sent a message, not with force, but with a single, quiet act that echoed across the stars. They didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They needed only to remind everyone that peace, real peace, was a power that could not be ignored.